Hello, fans of the Pandemic Baseball Book Club. I am Ralph Carhart, and I am here today with Mark Healey, author of Gotham Baseball, New York's all-time team. Mark, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you, Ralph, for having me on. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, it's been a struggle for us to find a time to chat. You are a busy human being, sir. You have a lot going on.
Well, you know, it's I've been lucky in the sense that as a essential employee for media, I've been working through this pandemic. Sometimes not full time, sometimes from home, but we've been kind of, especially our community in Rockaway that's been through Sandy, that's been through 9/11. So close to home with so many first responders that live and work here. So we haven't really had a chance to stay at home, like other
Right.
folks have. So, but I don't look at it as a curse. I look at it as a blessing, and to be able to serve, my community here in Rockaway as much as humanly possible. But yes, it has been certainly a busy time. So I haven't had as much time to, I guess, bemoan the fact that, we're not able to sell our books the way that we'd really like to. So that's why I guess the pandemic, not I guess, that's why the pandemic book club, baseball book club has been such a blessing, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, most definitely, most definitely. Like for me, certainly too. This whole experience was going to be a new experience for me anyway, because this is my first book. So,
Well, it's my first book as well. So we're all
having the pandemic guys there is as a background, as a backup, has been extraordinarily helpful. So you gave me a great a lead in right there, talking about being from Rockaway and stuff. So I'm going to jump right into it. You are obviously a New York local, a New York guy. You have a history in the sports media here in New York City. You've been at this a long, long time. So why now? What was the catalyst at this particular moment that brought you to write a book about baseball history in New York, about New York's all-time team?
Well, I've always been, and I explain it in the first couple of chapters of how, we got to where we are now with the book. I had been working in media since 1996. Prior to that, I was an actor, but I was always, I was whatever show I was in, I always had the game on in the dressing room. But when I was 26, I wanted to get into media. I had always had a great love for baseball, and I really enjoyed. I grew up with a dad who loved baseball, and I loved baseball, so it's always been a part of my life. And then, I read The Boys of Summer by Roger Kahn when I was really young, probably about 11 or 12 years old. And that kind of opened the door in my brain that, if this whole acting thing, doesn't ever work out, my God, how great would it be to write about baseball, to talk about baseball, to be involved in baseball in some way, shape, or form. And when I went to Queens College, I studied communications because in high school I was the PA announcer for, the varsity basketball games. I had a little, radio show over the PA system in the morning during my senior year. So a lot of people thought that I should go into radio. So that was what my backup plan was when I went to Queens. Like I said, I wasn't in the drama department. I had to have a major that was, that my parents thought was legitimate, I guess. So I wasn't a drama major, but I was in all the shows. I did a lot of shows. I still have friends that are in the, were in the drama department that now are in, the world professionally as actors and directors and things like that. Mm-hmm. So, as much as, being on stage and acting and singing and doing all that stuff was part of my soul, so was baseball. So baseball was always there. And in 2005, I started a baseball magazine called Gotham Baseball. and it's, you know, my life's passion. I've gotten to meet so many people through it, so many great people that are still with me that help out with Gotham. But, you know, it got to the point where I couldn't financially support it anymore. So I'd always go back to it. You know, I've always had the website, GothamBaseball.com. I've always had it. You know, the Wave newspaper where I work was kind enough in 2017 to let me bring it back to print. So I have a periodical, you know, a recurring Gotham Baseball column in the paper, which people like, and or at least most people like it. Not everyone does.
You're never going to please everybody. You're never
Yeah,
going to please.
well, what are you going to do? Anyway, so you know, about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, Todd Radham, who is one of the great, as you know, one of the great graphic designers in the country, we had gotten to be friendly over the course of a couple of years because of the Queens Baseball Convention, which was a Mets fan fest that was put together by Mets fans, independent of the team. And I was at the first one. I was part of the, you know, I guess part of the little group that was part of it. I didn't do any of the real work. That was, you know, Keith Blacknick and Dan Tuig and Shannon Sharp. Those guys, Shannon Sharp, those guys were really the ones that put it together. And then in ensuing years, it was really Keith and Dan that put the whole project together every year. And you know, they had looked at me early on as a panelist. I used to do State of the Mets. I used to do the new media panels. But State of the Mets was one of those panels where I would put together, you know, different people from different walks of covering the Mets, whether it was a blogger, whether it was someone from the radio, someone from print, someone from TV. I'd always try to make it interesting so that we had different perspectives. And so Todd Radham was on one of those panels. It was a uniform panel. I always made sure that I attended it because I always wanted to find out something new about Mets uniforms. I've always been totally into that aspect of baseball.
Yeah, and Todd's the guy for that too.
Oh, absolutely. So Todd and I, you know, got to be friendly. And at one point, we were sharing a beverage at one of the, I believe it was Catch Astoria, which had been hosting the QBC. And he said, look, you know what? The next time you are putting together a project, I'd love to do it with you. I'd love to be a part of it. So I always put that in the back of my brain. Because I was like, man, if I ever came up with an opportunity that was interesting to Todd, like I have to do it, you know,
Right.
That's a once in a lifetime type of situation. And so when I finally decided, because like I was thinking about three different projects with Gotham. I was like, do I do one final magazine, you know, the best of, and make it like a yearbook and, you know, sell it through the newsstands the way I used to do the magazine? Or do I create a online serialization the way that, you know, Stephen King had done with The Green Mile? But then I thought to myself, you know, there's got to be some way that I could at least say that when people think of me, they'll think of Gotham Baseball, you know, because it was always a critical success. It was never a commercial success. Mm-hmm. So Matt Cerrone, a good friend of mine who used to run Mets blog, which was probably the original and most successful Mets baseball blog out there, and certainly the model that mostly everyone else copies. Matt, you know, to me, a genius of marketing and knowing how to reach people and creating content. He's the one who said, why don't you just write a book? You know, like the way that you write, you know, you could write a book, you know, pretty, you know, not easily, but you could do it. And I said, you know what? That's an excellent idea. I think that's what I'll do. Mm-hmm. And that's really how it came about. You know, it was just years and years of, we're celebrating 15 years this year of Gotham Baseball. And so 3 years ago, Matt said, why don't you write a book? And I reached out to Todd because I told Todd that, you know, I was doing this book and I would need his help. And then I reached out to all the old gang that used to work on Gotham Baseball. And I said, guys, I want to write a book. I hope you can help. and everybody was on board. So that's how the book project got started.
Well, and my book was 10 years in the making. Your book was even longer. That's an epic lead in to get to creating that final product. It's funny you mentioned how you were always the guy in the dressing room who was listening to the game. Yeah, Mark, that I work in theater still. I've been working in theater for, at this point, close to 25 years, and I'm just doing that thing that you decided to do 25 years ago, and I'm trying to shift my career from theater to baseball. I'm a quarter of a century behind you, but the memory that sparked when you're talking about always listening in the dressing room is I had a final dress rehearsal that was taking place in the afternoon for some reason on the day of Robin Ventura's Grand Slam single, and I went into the rehearsal, and it was about the 5th or 6th inning, and I was very sad because I was going to miss the rest of the game. And rehearsal got over, and it turned out that there was still like another 2 hours of baseball left to go. We all quickly ran over to the White Horse Tavern and watched Robin Ventura hit the Grand Slam single. So you inspired that memory in me. Thank you so much.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was doing a show down at Westbeth. So we had rehearsal during the day, and it was opening day, and it was the year that Rick Cerone, I believe it was 1990 or 1991. It was 1991, and Rick Cerone, former Yankee catcher, had joined the Mets that year. And,
I remember Rick.
Right. So I went to the White Horse Tavern that day to watch the game. And I remember Cerone hitting a home run. And as I was walking back to rehearsal, I met Gregory Hines. Gregory Hines was on the street, and I was at the light, on the corner crossing the street. And I turn around and I see Gregory Hines just walking around in one of those tank top T-shirts. And, and I was like, oh. Hey, what's up, man? You and I are gonna have to have a different conversation so we don't get too far afield. But our coincidences are starting to become insane. I actually lived for a brief period of time. The first 2 months that I lived in New York City, I lived in the same building as Gregory Hines. Oh wow, that's so cool. It's so cool. It's scary, Ralph. We always every time we have a conversation, we
find something out. I know. Everyone thinks New York City's this big place. It's really not. Let's bring it back. Let's bring it back to your book, though. So let's, if you would, fill in the folks at home if they're not familiar with Gotham Baseball and your premise. Why don't you fill everyone in on what the premise of your book is, and talk a little bit about the process that you went through to choose the players that you included.
Well, Gotham Baseball came from the idea that folks should have a place to go to learn about baseball history. One of the things that I think separates baseball from every other sport is its connection to its history. Whether it's you're talking about the Brooklyn Dodgers or the New York Giants or the 1962 Mets or the 1927 Yankees. Fan bases here in New York, and I know all our West Coast friends in the Pandemic Baseball Book Club are going to roll their eyes, but I've always felt that the New York baseball fan, maybe Boston, maybe Chicago, really the only other fan bases that live and breathe the game the way that we do as baseball fans in New York. And my mom had always gotten me these coffee table books, all the time about baseball because she knew how much I loved it. So one year she bought me in the year 2000, she bought me this book, and I looked at it and I was like, another coffee table book. I'll put it in the bathroom and I'll read it, when I'm doing my deep thinking. And so I one night I'm reading 1904 and Jack Chesbro. And it said he won 41 games in 1904. Yeah. And I'm like, how do I not know that, especially since he was a New York player? And secondly, is that record real? Is it recognized? Because I'd never heard it before.
Right.
So I looked it up because at that time, in 2000, I had already been working at Associated Press in the sports department. for a couple of years, so had access to a lot of information that, maybe today is looked at as, you just Google it. But, back
Sure.
in 2000, it wasn't as much as, that information wasn't as readily available as you would think. So I looked it up and I found out, wow, I was a little disgusted with myself. How do I not know that? So I decided that there should be a place for the fan that, even though he was a Yankee slash Highlander, I should know that. I'm a baseball fan. I mean, I know how many. I know that Jackie Robinson, had his best year in 1949. I should know that Jack Chesbrough's best year was in 1904. And it was brilliant because it was like the bizarro world of baseball at that time. Because in 2000, the Yankees and Red Sox were still in the throes of the emperors and idiots, version of their rivalry. And I, of course, take that title from the great Mike McCarroll from the New York Post. But to read about a guy who was in a pennant race as a Yankee with Boston all year, and to lose the last game because of a wild pitch in the year that he, won 41 games. Like, I mean, it just blew my mind. And so that was really the kind of the seed that helped me create Gotham. And so then the process, as we, fast forward now, 7 years, 8 years, when I started to think about, when I started to think about what was going to come next, and years later, when the book became something that I wanted to do, I had to figure out how I would do it, right? And I had to figure out what would it be about. And at first, I had thought about this Field of Dreams type of thing, where all these different people from different eras would gather together for one last season. I had actually written an outline. I had written a whole bunch of stuff about, Buck O'Neill and Branch Rickey sitting in the room trying to figure out the team a la Mission Impossible. Peter Graves throwing the pictures on the table. Who are we going to call? I had this whole scene where they call Mickey Mantle and he picks up the phone. He's outside playing with the kids, and he comes in to the kitchen and he picks up the phone and he tells his wife, "Oh, that was Branch Rickey. He wants me to play ball, but I'm not going to." He goes back out and plays with the kids, because I think that maybe in a different era, maybe in a different, if we live in a multiverse, maybe in the multiverse he does decide to stay home with his kids and is, stays married and has a great life. Like all those different things I was playing around with. But then Marty Appel ruined it for me, because first he said, yeah, Mickey would never do that. and then he said, and then Marty said, well, who's the bad guy? And that ruined it for me, because I couldn't think of how I would incorporate a bad guy into this, historical, mythical type of novel.
Right.
So then, I remembered in 2013, I had, I might be getting my years wrong, so, forgive me.
Close enough.
But I had put together a ballot for people to vote on, because we were going to, my team at Gotham Baseball, we were thinking about partnering with Stratomatic and putting together a league of, Gotham Baseball, Windy City Baseball, Bay Area Baseball, like this league where, it was the best of the best. It was an all-star series, and we were going to do something like that. So I wanted help, and I wanted the fans to feel like they were a part of it, and I wanted other baseball people that I had met and worked with over the years. Marty Appel was one of them. But, different baseball executives, different people that, covered the game. And so the ballot took on a life of its own. And I had that in my back pocket. Because we never really kind of connected with Stratomatic the way I had wanted to. And it wasn't anybody's fault. It's just one of those projects that just don't gel. Sure. And eventually what happened is that when Matt told me to write the book, and then I thought about it, and I said, I have this ballot I'm not going to stick to the ballot specifically, but I'm certainly going to use it as almost like an outline as to, because the ballot did include the same process that I used for the book. You know, a Brooklyn Dodger, a New York Yankee, a New York Giant, and a New York Met on that ballot. Who was the best of the best at that position for that team, and allow the fans to kind of determine how they would, you know, how they would vote. So that was a big thing for me, to have the fan input. I wasn't going to be a slave to it, but I was going to certainly incorporate it in the process for picking the team. But it needed something else, you know, Ralph. It needed something else. It needed some kind of unifying thing, so that when people read the book, they were thinking about the players on the Gotham baseball team, not the Yankee, not the Met, not the New York Giant, not the Newark Eagle, not the, you know, it was about who is the Gotham baseball player. And that's where Todd Radham came in, because I had wanted a uniform. I've always been into that stuff. I've always been into designing uniforms and designing logos. I just don't have the skills. I have the mind for it, but I don't have the skills. And I was never able to execute my intent. And so I reached out to Todd and I said, Todd, I finally figured out a project that we can work on. How do you feel about, you know, creating a uniform for the Gotham baseball team that I select for this book? And he was like, oh, that's awesome. You know, absolutely, like right on. So I knew right there that, you know, something special was happening. If Todd Radham was interested, you know, to work with a guy like me who nobody knows on something that he knew was my passion project, then I knew I had something. And then, of course, we needed to, I've always been a fan of, you remember the old baseball magazine where they had the illustrated covers of like Christy Mathewson and, you know,
Sure.
back in the, for those of you watching this, you know, baseball magazine was around a long time. Before Baseball Digest, before the Sporting News, Baseball Magazine was how people got their, you know, their baseball picks. And, you know, this was before, you know, photos were a thing. So they would do these beautifully painted covers. And I've always had that in my mind as something that I wanted to do. And we did that with Gotham Baseball Magazine. We did kind of create that kind of visual. And you know, you have to read the book to get the rest of it. But ultimately, I reached out to my friend John Panisi, who is the official artist of the New York chapter of the Baseball Writers Association, the guy who's been doing illustrations and caricatures for baseball players forever. Some of his work hangs, you know, he's a former SVA graduate, School of Visual Arts graduate, like Todd was.
Like Todd, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, so I said to John, how do you feel about doing illustrations of these players in the Gotham baseball uniforms? You know, as a that having the uniform and then having John's illustrations, I thought were perfect. You know, that perfect synergy of the visual representation of what Gotham baseball is all about, which is the past, the present, and the future of the New York game. And so that's really how the process started. I was paralyzed until I figured out, you know, the visual aspect of it. And that really is how the book's process, you know, kind of, you know, the background and how it began.
That's yeah, you had quite a team working with you. I got to tell you, you got some heavy hitters backing you up there. So
yeah, absolutely. And that, to me, you know, I have that kind of team here at the Wave. You know, we collaborate. We use that word all the time. For the NCIS fans out there, we campfire all the time, and we work out problems and work out solutions. And that's really how I've always wanted it to be. Yes, I am an egomaniac, and I like to be out front. I won't lie and say that that's not my role. But you know,
well, you mentioned you were an actor, so that was already accepted. That as a given.
Yes. So, you know, and I think that over the years, you know, for every misstep and for every stumble, I've always had a great team of people around me to help and support, you know, including my wife, including my parents, including my kids, including my friends, you know, that aren't involved necessarily directly into Gotham or any of the things that I do. But yes, I've always relied on great teams because I think it's really the only way to be successful.
And for an egomaniac, you chose a very egalitarian way of putting your roster together, right? You had other people vote. You had other folks weigh in on who they felt should have been on the ballot and who should have been considered.
Yeah, because I felt that, again, I'll go back to the Mission Impossible thing. That's always one of those things that always stuck in my head, where, Peter Graves is sitting there and he's, Mr. Phelps, and he's trying to figure out each mission and who's he going to bring on each mission. And he would sit there and he would flip through the pictures and be, oh, that's a weapons expert. Oh, that's a makeup expert. I always loved that. And like when I was first thinking about doing Gotham as a book, I had that same imagery for, Buck O'Neill and Branch Rickey putting the greatest team together ever. I also had, the sense that the debate is where I was president of the speech and debate team in high school. And I love debating sports. Even if, I'm wrong, I still want to get my analysis in for the player that I think should be in a place, in a spot.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been that way my whole life. And I talk about it in the book where me and my friends used to sit on the stoop every day. And, I knew, especially after the Mets traded Seaver, I knew the Mets were terrible. But I still had to, step up for my team. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that's really where it all started, as far as my wanting to debate. So getting the fans involved in the ballot, getting other writers, other experts, other analysts, other people who break down. And here's the other thing too. I wanted it to be people who broke down those kinds of things in different ways. Whether it's my friends in the sabermetric world, who I call saber magicians. The guy, I hate math. There's no way. I don't, I hate math like I hate the Philadelphia Flyers. Okay? Sorry, Brad. I really hate the Flyers. So, and I hate math with the same vengeance. And so, but I also respect it. I always use the analogy of a nail gun. I don't know how to use a nail gun, but I respect that it's a great tool that other people should use.
That will really hurt you if you use it poorly. So let's look at your roster. Let's look at the choices folks made. All right, and we'll start in the outfield. Your three outfielders are Babe Ruth, Willie Mays, and Monty Irvin. Now, Ruth is, of course, a given, as is, frankly, in my opinion, Mays. The one that stands out is Irvin, not because he's unworthy, but just because we typically think of him as having a shorter Major League Baseball career because of segregation. So it's interesting that you mentioned before that when you were considering all the New York teams, you threw the Newark Eagles in there. That sort of opens the door up for Irvin. Can you just tell us a little bit about, where you were beginning to discover upon the responses and things like that Irvin was going to be your left fielder?
Before I wrote the book, Irvin was going to be my left fielder. It turned out that the vote went in his favor, which was great, but he was my left fielder, and I'll tell you why. I've always been, even way, way, way before Gotham Baseball, I was always infatuated with the Polo Grounds and the New York Giants and Leo DeRocher and Willie Mays, because my dad, even though he was a hardcore Dodger fan, used to tell me about sitting in the bleachers. There's that famous picture that John Thorne edited this book, the John Thorne that, the same John Thorne that did the foreword for your book.
I've heard of him, yeah.
And he has this book, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, and I think it's The Glory Days of New York Baseball. I think it's called that. But it's a book. It's a book that he put together that is visual. It's phenomenal. It's a great book. And in one of the pictures is of these 4 or 5 kids sitting in the horseshoe, the outfield of the Polo Grounds. And my dad, when he saw the picture, he said to me, I used to sit in those seats all the time. I used to love going to the Polo Grounds to watch, to watch the Giants play the Dodgers. And so here's a hardcore Dodger fan telling me how he used to love to sit in the Polo Grounds. So, I've always been about the storytelling, the magical storytelling of baseball. And so that always stuck with me. And when we first started thinking about visuals for Gotham, for the magazine and for the website, I always went back to the Polo Grounds as being, because everybody talks about Ebbets Field. Everybody talks about the Boys of Summer and the Brooklyn Dodgers. And that doesn't make me resent them. It just means like hold on a second. The New York Giants were the kings. They were the Yankees before the Yankees. They were everybody. Yeah. They had Christy Mathewson. They had John McGraw. So I was very, very well aware of Irvin as one of those players like Ray Dandridge, like so many others that never got their due as major league players, or at least unlike Buck O'Neil, unlike Josh Gibson, unlike so many other great players, Oscar Charleston, that didn't get a chance to play in Major League Baseball. Monty Irvin did, and we got glimpses of just how good he was. Mm-hmm. And an interview I did with Buck O'Neil, I still to this day is the greatest interview I've ever done. I'm a better person for it. Buck O'Neil told me that you can't judge anyone really as a baseball player unless you said you've seen Monty Irvin play when he was 20 years old. I mean, wow. That was the universal theme when there were rumblings about someone going to be the first black player in the major leagues. The league took a vote and said it was Monty Irvin. Right. And when you think about who was playing in the Negro Leagues at that time, mm-hmm. I mean, let's be honest. That's that's incredible to think that he was that much of a five-tool guy, that he had that much ability, but he also had the charisma, the gravitas to be the type of player to not only be the number one choice of everyone in the Negro Leagues, but also have the ability to play at that level. Monty Irvin was always going to be my left fielder. I never felt there was anybody that ever played in New York in left field that ever was going to come close to him, especially when you talk about what he did in the Negro Leagues. And I really tried to statistically support the argument by using the data that had been put together by SABR and by the Baseball Hall of Fame when they had their special committee to really kind of reconstruct for people who, were doubting Thomas's about Monty Irvin as the left fielder. To me, it was going to be very hard for me not to put Monty Irvin in the book. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting too. You mentioned how there's so much has been written. There's so much, romance about the history of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And the Giants have sort of been shuttled to the side. And when you look at their success factors, the Giants far outshone the Dodgers, just count the titles, right? And I've often wondered if one of the reasons why that is because the Dodgers have that legacy of Jackie Robinson. There was something about the importance of that helped galvanize the Dodgers in public consciousness. And if the Giants had, just brought in Irvin sooner, if the Giants had been the team that had integrated baseball, if we had seen Monty Irvin in 1946, would the Giants be the team that sort of captivates the public imagination the way the Dodgers do?
It's interesting. I really think that things happen for a reason, and I think that it all happened the way it happened, and I think that if Monty Irvin had been Branch Rickey's first black player, mm-hmm. I don't know if Willie Mays gets to be Willie Mays without Monty Irvin as his mentor.
Sure.
I think that when Monty Irvin came to the Giants, he clearly wasn't the player he was. But he was good enough to be a really good player on that team, be an all-star caliber player on that team, and really mentor not only Willie, but also be kind of the de facto leader of the black players on that team. And Leo DeRocher, Buck O'Neill said it to me, Mudcat Grant said it to me when I interviewed him. They all knew that DeRocher wasn't driven by race. DeRocher was driven by winning.
Wins. That was all DeRocher wanted.
And if you know DeRocher's history, you know that a great person in his life was a black man who was a janitor, I guess, in one of the schools that either DeRocher went to, or somehow was connected to. It was this black man that really was his mentor and really helped him like through his life. So, you know, whatever happened later on in life with Leo, I can't speak to. I wasn't around him. I don't know what, you know, Cesar Cedeno and some of the other people that had problems with Leo maybe later on in life with the Astros. But I will say this, Willie adored him. You know, the other black players on the team knew that Leo had their back. And I think that, you know, I think Monty came, you know, like Buck O'Neill says, you know, I was right on time. You know, when he says that, I think Monty Irvin felt the same way. I never got the sense from reading and doing all the research about Monty that he ever was resentful of, you know, not being the first, and that he was grateful for the time that he had in the major leagues.
Let's shift to your infield to keep things moving here. Your infield has Lou Gehrig at first, Jackie Robinson at second, Derek Jeter at shortstop, David Wright at third, and Mike Piazza behind the plate. Now, again, it's really hard to argue Gehrig and Robinson. Those are pretty much shoo-ins, right? And we'll come back to Piazza in a second. But let's look at the left side of the infield. Let's look at Jeter and Wright. Both of those are recent players. So it's interesting when you think of the long history of New York baseball, that you landed on these two guys who were so recent in the public consciousness. Were you worried at all about a recency bias as you were doing all this, as you were getting this feedback from folks?
Honestly, I never really worried about recency bias, to be honest with you. I knew that there would be people that would accuse me of picking David Wright because I'm a Met fan over Nettles. What they don't realize is I'm not your typical Met fan that hates the Yankees with some, you know, with a visceral hate, which probably you are, Ralph.
No, I'm not. Actually, I hate nobody. I hate no teams. I don't even hate the Yankees. I don't even hate the Astros. Like, I hate nobody. So
well, my dad hates the Yankees. He hates them, you know. So I was brought up to, you know, really hate the Yankees. And most of my friends, I'd say the majority of my friends that are Met fans hate the Yankees with, like, you know. But I guess what changed it for me was that in 1992, I moved to California. I moved to LA. I lived in Hollywood for a year, trying to be an actor and chasing the dream. And when I came back, I had missed New York so much. And, you know, I missed New York so much. And it was a combination of missing New York baseball, being starved from New York baseball for a year. And I'd always watched the Yankees when the Mets weren't on, and I vice versa, or I'd flip back and forth because I had uncles that were Yankee fans, and, you know, uncles who I loved dearly who were Yankee fans, and I knew more about the Yankees than they did. So it was easy for me to kind of, not that I would ever root for the Yankees, you know, and wear a jersey or you know, say I'm a Yankee fan or I'm a New York fan. I don't say that. I'm a Met fan. Right. And unlike some of my friends in the media who, you know, say they don't root, I just feel like I'd rather be open about it and defend my stance rather than say I don't root for anybody and then hide behind my you know, paper and pencil or my laptop and say, oh, I'm not emotionally involved. I am emotionally involved. You know, maybe that makes me, you know, biased, but I don't think it does, because most people think I'm a Yankee fan because I criticize the Mets so much. But I watched Nettles dominate the '78 World Series, so it's not like I don't appreciate. He wore number 9, my lucky number. You know, Nettles was a great player, but David Wright would be a Hall of Fame player if he didn't get hurt.
Sure.
And for the defensive majesty of Nettles, while he had power, and while he had some memorable, like I said, he had some memorable moments in October, David Wright was a better overall player. He just was. And even though look, does it hurt my argument that I love David Wright? Yes, but he's not my favorite Met of all time. I did love the guy because he played the guy. We had this thing in the AP. My buddy Doug Feinberg came up with it. He's still there, 25 years. Just celebrated his 25th year at AP. And Dougie dubbed the players I like the heels guys. Oh, he's a heels guy. He's a heels guy. Well, David Wright is like the ultimate heels guy. He played the game with determination, with passion, gets his uniform dirty, but he's also a gentleman. He also plays the game as if he's the guy that everybody's watching, and he wants to make sure that he does the right thing. And he cared about his team, and he played for his manager, sometimes to a fault, but he was just the kind of guy that I really enjoyed watching play. But at the end of the day, Nettles was a guy I loved too. I loved watching him play as well. There was no way A-Rod was being on this team. There was no way.
Well, that was going to be my follow-up question is, Nettles.
And I used his own quote. I used his own quote against him. He goes, "If I don't get into Hall of Fame, it's my own fault." Well, you didn't get onto the Gotham. Not that I care, but I don't think A-Rod cares, that he's not on the Gotham Baseball team.
Sure. Yeah, that's where I was curious about, because, Nettles, obviously Nettles was the star when I was a kid. And I used to, Nettles damaged my baseball career immeasurably when I was in Little League, because I believed as an infielder that every ball was to be retrieved by making an all-out dive across the field, because I was just so used to watching Greg Nettles make that move that I thought that was how you played the game. And he ruined any chances I had of ever being a professional. I blame him. But it did occur to me, that A-Rod was absent from consideration. So.
Well, look, a lot of people have made that argument, to me, and I said, look, it's fine. It's my book. So,
Sure.
And here's the thing. I love Alex Rodriguez. I love the guy, and
I hope so. He's about to become your owner.
I hope We'll do that on a Gotham Baseball podcast.
Right. We'll chat about that one.
The ownership follies. But the first time I saw Alex Rodriguez play, I was watching a Mariners game on satellite, because I was working at AP, and I was going to write the preview for the following game that Seattle was playing. I don't know if it was the third game of the series or it was going to be the opening of another series, but Alex had been brought up and was playing. And I saw him make a play. He was deep in the hole at shortstop. And the range that he showed going over, I'm almost positive the ball went right over second base. But he came all the way from the hole on shortstop. Ranged, to second base, and made that like transfer where he picked up the glove and then he threw across his body and got the guy out. And I said, that is the most amazing play I've ever seen, at least up until that point. And so I followed Alex Rodriguez's career, immensely. When after the 2000 series, and it looked like Alex really wanted to come to the Mets and he didn't, I was furious with Steve Phillips and Fred Wilpon for screwing that up. Here's a superstar that wants to come play for you. Give him whatever he wants. They used to do the same thing with Tom Seaver. They'd be like, "Oh, Tom Seaver, he actually wants money for an appearance." Well, he's Tom Seaver. He's Tom Seaver. Give him whatever he wants. So anyway, Alex is somebody I admired. I thought that when he came to the Yankees, I was one of those people. If you go to a Gotham Baseball magazine from that time, in 2006, we had made David Wright the Player of the Year. on the cover. It was our third issue, or maybe it was 2005. I don't remember. I don't remember the year, but it was also no, it was the same year. It was 2005. It was the same year that Alex had come to the Yankees, and we did a whole thing on Alex Rodriguez in that issue. And we did it because I directed the guys. I said, look, we've got to write about Alex Rodriguez. I mean, the guy came. It didn't have a great season, his first year in New York, but he certainly, did better than a lot of other people who come here with the pressure of that contract and the pressure of that deal. And, and I always felt he was maligned by the Yankee fan for a long time. So I kind of had his back a little bit. And then when the whole steroid thing came out, and then another steroid thing came out, and then Selena Roberts' excellent book, where she basically alleges that, Alex may have been on steroids his entire career or performance-enhancing drugs his entire career, because in high school he used to work out with Jose Canseco. So I've really kind of turned me away from A-Rod. And so when it came time to put together this book, I didn't even consider him. I didn't even put him on the ballot. Sure.
Let's talk about what was probably, in my opinion, the toughest position for you to choose in the whole book, and that's the catcher's position. The pitchers are another matter. We'll talk about them in a second. But you at least had the luxury of being able to choose 5 starters when you're discussing the pitchers, to narrow down a catching roster that includes Yogi Berra and Bill Dickey and Roy Campanella. What did it take for you to ultimately decide upon Mike Piazza? What was it that pushed Mike over the top?
Well, there's a couple of things. The first thing is that I did not put Mike Piazza as the Met on the ballot. I put Gary Carter. And I explained in that chapter, I don't want to give too much away, but I explained in that chapter why Gary Carter was on the ballot and the special place he has for me and my family. And he also won a World Series with the Mets and was the missing piece in that World Series, whereas Mike never won the World Series with the Mets. And it didn't, like I did with every other position on the ballot, there was a write-in candidate available. And if anyone thought differently about a player, they could write him in. And so when I didn't put Piazza on the ballot, that was the one thing that fans really were upset about. You had to see some of the letters I got from people. How could you not put Mike Piazza on the ballot, this and that? Gary Carter would be his backup, this and that. So, he won the write-in ballot by an extreme amount. That wasn't the reason why I picked him. I kind of figured that most people thought that Mike Piazza was better than Gary Carter. At least when you look at the
statistically, the offensive statistics.
When you look at the just the scope of their careers, especially the age of maybe the people that were voted, But then I did a deep dive into the numbers, and I started interviewing people about it. Before I made my final selection, I interviewed Mike Vaccaro. I interviewed a bunch of different people in the sabermetric community when we were talking about defensive metrics for Mike. I always thought that Mike was a phenomenal player, phenomenal hitter. I thought he was a disadvantage behind the plate, because he couldn't throw anybody out, and because other teams would look to, specifically the Braves, would look to, take advantage of that fact. But I also felt that in defense of Mike, I also felt that there were a lot of pitchers on the Mets that made Mike's life more difficult as starting pitchers, and that Mike was a guy that wasn't going to badmouth his pitchers, or badmouth anybody else, and he would take the criticism, on himself. I've also had the opportunity to interview Mike, so I always felt that Mike was done a disservice by the Mets because they never really gave him a chance to get support. By the time that Mike came to the team, Robin Ventura had one great year, one okay year, and one terrible year. And really, he was the best. And once they got rid of John Olerud, I mean, Todd Zeal was no John Olerud. All respect to Todd, who I like. But you know, when Piazza had Olerud hitting in front of him, and you know, always there. I mean, how many times did Mike hit a 2-run homer in the first inning? You know, when John had figured out a way to get on base. So I knew it would be difficult, but when Mike Vaccaro, that kind of clicked it into place, when he said, because I thought Yogi was going to win this vote hands down.
I would have assumed
vote hands down. I mean,
I would have assumed it would have been Yogi. Campanella
had three MVPs just like Yogi did, but Yogi was probably the better. He was probably the better defender. I don't know. You know, I don't know enough about Campanella to say that he was a better defender than. I mean, I know both of them were great catchers, but again, I thought that the combination of Yogi's Met and Yankee career would be the difference, and I wouldn't even have to think about it.
Right.
Put Yogi on the team, but it didn't happen that way. So when Mike Vaccaro told me, well, Mike Piazza might not just be the best hitting catcher of all time, he might be one of the best right-handed hitting players of all time. So that's the thing that kind of clicked it into place for me, because I know Mike Vaccaro does not have recency bias. The guy writes some of the best baseball history books around. So that really meant a lot to me as to why I made that decision.
Yeah, I always, like you, I always felt that Mike's defense was underappreciated because he had that glaring issue with being able to throw out base stealers. But, you know, the fact that he guided a pitching staff with the likes of Bobby Jones and Rick Reed to a World Series was telling. You know, he knew how to be a field general. He knew how to get what he needed from his pitchers. And to me, that's a more important defensive metric from a catcher than your ability to throw a guy out stealing second base.
He was also really durable for a guy that just destroyed his body. I mean, he was really durable until later in his career, where his career went on the normal, he didn't all of a sudden become this, superhero like Pudge Rodriguez, who got in on the first ballot. And let's be honest, and I love Pudge too, but it just seems to me the baseball writers can be so infuriating. Why did Gary Carter have to wait 8 years to get into the Hall of Fame when Carlton Fisk was a borderline, was a first ballot Hall of Famer? Why did Mike Piazza have to win? Because of steroid rumors. Steroid rumors. Who had more steroid rumors than Pudge Rodriguez, who was on the steroid team of the Texas Rangers? So, I always felt that the rumors around, and again, Murray Chass doesn't have to like me, but his whole back acne story about Mike and why people believed Murray because of that reason. And there was never any greater satisfaction than I had when I hit a line drive off of Murray Chase, off his knee when he was pitching for the Times and the Press League. But, and I told him that, but, Murray doesn't have much of a sense of humor. But I just felt it was a disservice to Mike. Mike shouldn't have waited that long. He shouldn't have waited that long to get into the Hall of Fame. And I think that, people will say, how could you put in Mike when he was a steroid guy? I don't know if he was a steroid guy. He never had a positive test. And the only suspicion that we have from Mike, I've seen the guy up close. I interviewed the guy. I'm no expert, but I worked in a gym for years. I wrote about this recently. During the 98 home run chase, when everybody was going gaga over McGuire and Sosa, I had worked in gyms in the 90s in Long Island, my best friend's gym. And I saw professional athletes from all walks of sports work out in there. And I knew that they were on stuff. So I knew about steroids. So I looked at that home run chase in 98 with a jaundiced eye. I did. So, I've always had this, and maybe it's Rocky IV, maybe it's Drago, being on the steroids. I always lose a bad taste in my mouth. But, I never felt like Mike was that kind of a guy. I just never did. And maybe I'll be proved wrong down the road, and shame on me. But, I always believed Mike when he said he used the monster packs and that he was a guy that really, I knew those guys. I knew those guys that worked out in the gym every day that, swore by the monster packs and the different things that these weightlifters and bodybuilders were using. Not bodybuilders, but weightlifters, guys who, wanted to be strong. Not necessarily look defined like the bodybuilders, and those are the guys that really kind of started the whole steroid craze. But as far as baseball is concerned, with Mike, I just felt like after talking to a lot of people and getting all the information, it just looked to me that the fans were right in this instance, and Mike should have been the catcher.
I agree. So let's look at your starting rotation. We're running short on time, so let's. I'm going to jump ahead here. Your starting rotation is Christy Mathewson, Whitey Ford, Tom Seaver, Carl Hubble, and Dazzy Vance. For a guy like me who loves the old timey game, the fact that you got like Dazzy Vance and Hubble in there is great. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Let's take those 5 guys and take them off the table. Now you need to put together your next starting 5. Who were the guys who were 6 through 10? Who were the ones that almost made the book but didn't?
Well, I definitely would put Gooden in there. I definitely put Red Ruffing in there. I'd probably put Jerry Kuzman on that team. I'd probably put, did I say Red Ruffing?
You did.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So we've got Gooden, Ruffing, Cone, Kuzman. I wrote about Sal Magli, and he didn't have the dominant career that a lot of guys had, but for 4 or 5 years, he was the best pitcher in baseball, or close to it. I'd probably put him on that list. I'd probably fill it out with him. If I had to have a 10th pitcher, it'd probably be Magli, because I think that, he was just so good. I mean, he just, and his career was so reminiscent of what Dazzy Vance went through, really not getting to the big leagues until 30.
Until later,
which
right.
At that time, which was ridiculous because guys were done.
You were done when you were 30, right?
I mean, I'm probably missing some people. Guidry is a guy that probably could be on there.
It's fascinating when you get past that top 5 and you move how quickly there's a Hall of Fame drop off. 1 through 5 are all Hall of Famers, and the other names you mentioned, other than Ruffing, are not.
Right, and I think that's because in New York we value tenacity. We value guys that touch the sun. Those guys that really kind of. I mean, my God, Gooden, 1985, Dwight Gooden was. I mean, I'm sorry, I've never seen anyone pitch at that level.
Maybe the only other time I've seen that was Pedro in 2000.
But here's the thing. This is the difference. Pedro was a little guy that threw hard and threw well. But Doc was elegant, man. He was elegant the way he pitched. There's it wasn't a mistake that This Week in Baseball used to have his slow motion throwing the curveball in the credits. There's a reason, because it looked so good. That's why it was Lord Charles, not Uncle Charlie.
Right.
And look, I always loved Pedro when he pitched in other places. When he came to the Mets, I thought he was, on the other side of a great career. And I know people were excited about it, but I'm always of the unpopular opinion that he came here and he stole money. And it was Omar's way of like kind of sticking it to everybody else that he brought Pedro in here to bring in, and I don't blame Omar for it. But I felt that he was done when he came here, and he let all these little injuries kind of.
Sure, and he wasn't with the Mets long enough for him to really be in any consideration for your project whatsoever. So he's not started. I'm just saying in terms of dominant seasons, that's the only other comparable thing I've seen to Gooden's 85. Gooden's 85 was,
it was just unworldly, and it wasn't just because of the numbers. It's just the way he did it. You
Yeah.
know, those high
Yeah.
fastballs.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that was Koufax-esque.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know that Koufax was a lefty, but the way that he pitched, where everything stopped, you know,
Mm-hmm.
everything stopped when Dwight was on the mound. When he was with the Yankees in '96 and he was pitching that night, I mistakenly put that game on.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't put it on because somebody said, "Oh, Doc is pitching a no-hitter." I
Yeah.
didn't put it on because, you know, my wife wasn't home; she was out doing something, and I was like, "Oh, I'll watch some baseball." I put the game on, yeah, and Doc's pitching. I stopped. I was like, "All right, Doc's pitching for the Yankees. Great, let's do it."
Yeah.
And he pitched a no-hitter. It blew my mind. I was so happy for him. And somebody like, "How could you be happy for him? He did it as a Yankee." It's like, Doc, man. Like, I
Yeah. I
always
can't.
rooted for Doc. You know, even with all his drug problems and all that other stuff, I always rooted for Doc. So to me, Doc just was majestic.
And there's, you know, Doc has that. I can't really think of any other guys who had such significant moments with two New York teams.
Right.
You know, he had that extended period with the Mets, and then he had that brief moment of glory with the Yankees and the no-hitter and everything. I can't think of any other New York, any other pitchers who had
Well,
something
Magley,
substantial.
Sal Magley, you know.
Oh,
Sal
Magley, right, because
when you
right.
think about Magley was the '56 Dodgers. They don't win the pennant without Magley. Magley stepped up. He pitches a no-hitter that year.
Right.
Magley had kind of those moments. David Cohn has had moments with both teams.
Yeah, there's Cone too, right.
You know,
Right.
if I was going to write a
Sure.
book about, you know, the guys who played for the Mets and the Yankees, I mean, those guys would be in it, you know.
Yeah.
You're right. No one really, outside of Magley's the only guy that really came close to matching that moments of glory with both teams.
I'm gonna give you one more toughie, one more that I'm gonna have you try and do off the top of your head. So you've done this project, you've written this book, you've winnowed down the rosters of 4 franchises down to, you know, to 14 guys. I'm gonna make it even harder for you now. From that list, in your opinion, who is the New York's greatest ball player not named Babe Ruth?
Willie Mays.
Yeah.
Willie
Is he where does he rank in your all-time pantheon? Let's go beyond New York. Where does Willie rank in your all-time pantheon? He's a top 3, top 5.
I think he's you know, everyone's going to have a different opinion about this. I'm a hard marker and I'm old school. So if I had to put together the top 3 baseball players of all time, it would be Babe Ruth number 1.
Mm-hmm.
It would be Willie Mays number 2,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be Jackie Robinson number
3. That's a list that is difficult to argue with.
I mean, you know, I know there's guys that put up better numbers. You know, you could put Mickey Mantle up there. You could put, you know, you could put other. I think for Jackie to do what he did under the conditions that he had to do them, when you're not talking about Babe Ruth or Willie Mays, who else dealt with what he did and had the year in 49 or had the career that he did, as short as it was? Just what he had to deal with. I don't think people get it. I don't think people understand. And you know, I still think to this day, just like I wrote in my Jackie Robinson chapter, if Leo DeRocher had been his manager his entire career, I think Jackie would have played longer. I think Jackie would have had even better numbers, and I don't think Jackie would have been as bitter at the end of his career as he was, because I think that Leo would have ran through the wall for Jackie. I really do. And I'll debate anyone who wants to debate me on that, but that's how I've always felt about Jackie. I felt that Jackie got got a terrible deal when it went from, and I know that he loved Bert Shotton, and I know that he loved Chuck Dressen, but I still think at the end of the day, the 2 guys that should have been, Leo should have had Jackie. Jackie should have had Leo. I mean, I know that it would have hurt may have hurt Willie Mays, you know, and his. And the thing is, all 3 of those guys, Ralph, are all connected to Leo.
Yeah.
They're all connected to Leo somehow.
Yeah.
Because Babe Ruth, you know, they were roommates, and he got him thrown off the Dodgers because he thought he stole his watch. and you know, he was Willie's manager, and he was Jackie's champion. Jackie
Yeah.
doesn't, maybe another manager lets these guys dictate to him that Jackie shouldn't play on the team, shouldn't play on the Dodgers. So that's funny. I didn't even think about that until until I was saying, it's like, wow, they're all connected to Jackie.
You've got me now. They had that very brief period in 48, the beginning of 48, where Leo was actually Jackie's manager. And now I want to go back and just look at what Jackie's stats were for the first half of 48 before Leo, went over to the Giants. I'm ever so curious to see.
Well, they were not happy with one another, and I detail it in the book. You got to check it out.
Mm-hmm.
That chapter, folks out there who don't know what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating because there's a whole history there, what people don't realize. They just read once that Jackie Robinson and Leo DeRocher hated each other, and they don't really know why, and they don't know the nature of the relationship, and that's what And really, I guess in closing, because I guess we're running out of time, but it was those chapters that guys like Jackie, guys like Babe Ruth, guys like Lou Gehrig, that have been written about ad nauseum. That had been written about over and over and over again. And I had to say to myself, how am I going to get, those chapters done? What am I going to write there that no one is going to just be like, oh, I don't need to read this chapter. I know everything I know there is about Jackie Robinson.
Right.
And that's why I wrote those chapters the way I did, so that people could walk away. And that was my goal, really, with this book. I wanted people to walk away from it saying, I did not know that. Because I love that when that happens.
Yeah. And it's a challenge.
Yeah, it's
a challenge when you're talking about guys like Babe Ruth and Jackie Robinson. We've all heard the stories. So finding something new is, and you do a great job with that. It's that was one of the things I loved about the book, was if I can walk away from a book, like yours especially, which is sort of just a snapshot. We're not getting an in-depth bio of these guys. You're getting a snapshot of all of them. If I can read a book like that and walk away with something new, that is a good book, in my opinion. That makes me happy. What else are you working on? Do you have another book in the chamber? Or what?
I don't want to talk about what I'm working on right now, because it's going to be a series of things that I'm working on. But I am working, believe it or not, the next thing that I'm working on, aside from my job at the paper, which is all encompassing, I'm working on a play, actually.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Well, when you finish that one, give me a call, my friend.
I will. I'm working on a play, something I talked about. I don't know if you know Michael Puzo. He's a playwright, and he was with me in a bunch of different. He's an actor and a playwright. We performed together in a bunch of shows at Queens College. We did some independent. We formed an independent company with another friend, Chris Cardona, and we did a couple of plays together off Broadway. But I haven't been in that world for a long time. And it took me 3 years to write a book. Maybe it won't take me 10 years to write a play. So I'm hoping that I'm collaborating with a couple of people on it. And I've talked to Michael about it. Michael always seemed interested in it. So who knows? Who knows where it goes? But that's kind of the next thing I'm playing around with.
Well, we'll get off camera, and then I want to hear some more. All right.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mark Healey, writer of Gotham Baseball, New York's all-time team. Thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Oh, anytime, Ralph. And folks, if you want to buy the book, so just go to Pandemic Baseball Book Club, and you can get my book, you can get Ralph's book, you can get everybody's book. I know we got a great opening day giveaway that. By the time you see this, maybe it's already, so congratulations to the winners. But Pandemic Baseball Book Club brought myself and Ralph together. I'll always be grateful for that, Ralph, because this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship, as they say.
I agree.
My friend. So best of luck, and thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for doing this.